Why is this house smelling like this? Asked Mrs. Chukwu, who just came in from a trip. She had entered a duplex and the smell had permeated her nostrils. She looked around the house. No one was in sight, not even her 5 years old daughter. She tried to figure out where the smell was coming from. She realized it was from the kitchen. Is Ejiro back? I thought she said she was going to see her mother today. She soliloquized. Ejiro is the chef in the house, while her Daisy is the servant and nanny combined together. Mrs. Chukwu went into the kitchen and saw her Daisy cooking. Adaeze greeted her madam as soon as she saw her. Her daughter ran to her, chanting, "Mommy, mommy." "What are you doing?" asked Mrs. Chukwu in disgust as she covered her nose with her hand. "I'm cooking, ma," answered Adaeze, wondering why her boss asked a question with an obvious answer. "Of course I know you are cooking, but why does it smell this terribly?" asked Mrs. Chukwu, still covering her nose. "I'm cooking a native soup, ma," said Adaeze, smiling. "You will love it. I cooked enough for all of us," said Adaeze confidently. She was confident despite the displeasure on her boss's face, because Mrs. Chukwu has been a kind woman to her, so she was confident she was safe. "Count me out. How can I eat something that wants to make me puke? And to think you are using my pots? What's the name of that native soup you are cooking?" "I am not familiar with any native soup that smells this bad," she complained. Adaeze felt a tinge of pain but shook it off. "It's my own special formulation," she said. "You said what?" asked her boss in disbelief. "I have great culinary skills that make me create meals by myself," said Adaeze. "Create meals?" Adaeze nodded. Mrs. Chukwu shook her head tiredly, carried her daughter and left the kitchen. Adaeze has been working as a maid and a nanny in Mrs. Chukwu's house for 6 months. They are from the same village and Mrs. Chukwu had taken her from there. Her job didn't entail cooking, so Ejiro has been the one cooking all the meals in the house. Mrs. Chukwu and her husband usually relished her meals and they didn't fail to compliment her culinary skills many times. Their visitors also had the same testimony. However, Adaeze always had complaints about her food. "This food has an almost dear taste. This food lacks some major ingredients. I haven't been eating well since I came into this house," she would complain. At first, Ejiro was concerned about how to please her, because her job entailed ensuring every member of the household is well fed. She wondered why the complaints usually came from her alone, but compliments from other people had assured her of her culinary skills. She has given Adaeze the chance to cook one day, and after seeing the concoction she made in the name of special recipe, she had warned her never to complain about her food. Who mashes egg and banana together? You. Who breaks 10 cubes of seasoning into powder form, molds them with little water and then fry? You. You have very silly set of recipes, she fumed. Adaeze had looked at her in pity. "If only she knows what she is missing out on," she said, and continued eating from her plate of food. Mrs. Chukwu wasn't at home when this happened. Adaeze had developed her weird cooking skills as an adult. She made a friend in the village few months before she traveled. The girl, who was a stranger and claimed to have moved in from a neighboring village, looked beautiful and strange in her ways. She had her head full of grey hair at her young age, and she had sharp eyes. She had shown interest in Adaeze at the stream when she went to fetch water and had stricken up a conversation with her. Adaeze and Ngozi had become best of friends so fast. Adaeze didn't even know how it happened, but she realized she always wanted to be around her. Being with Ngozi was soothing to her, as Ngozi took her to many places in the village that even her, who was born and bred in the village, didn't know. Ngozi later knew there were 10 streams in the village as against 4 that Adaeze thought it had. How come you know so much despite not growing in this village? Asked Adaeze. That's because I'm a special child, Ngozi would reply and walk away, leaving Adaeze to ruminate over the confusion. Adaeze had walked in on Ngozi one day, cooking food. After exchanging pleasantries, Adaeze watched how she did her cooking, and to her shock, it was against the popular styles that many of the villagers used in cooking. From Ngozi, Adaeze had learnt awful recipe combinations like adding juice from oranges into a vegetable soup, mashing a carrot and adding it to okra soup. At first, it was strange to Adaeze, who would almost throw up whenever he saw Ngozi eating. Ngozi would get angry and ask her to leave her house. This drove her to apologize to Ngozi, and in a bid to pacify her, she scooped some of her food into her mouth, leaving Ngozi with a smile. Since that day, she has developed an inordinate appetite for strange meals. Soon, she started cooking like Ngozi. A month later, Adaeze had to leave for the city. She had spent some days in her friend Lizzie's house before moving to her new workplace. Lizzie complained a lot about her food. She only allowed her cook twice. The second was because Adaeze lamented on how she hadn't been eating good food since she got into her house, and how she should be allowed to cook her food. Lizzie had to leave the house that day because of the nauseating smell that the food produced. She wondered if all was well with her friend, or if she was just the one exaggerating. That was the last time she allowed her to cook in her house, as she said she couldn't allow her pots to be used in such terrible cooking. Mrs. Chukwu had also banned her from cooking in her house. Adaeze had gone to spend the weekend in Lizzie's house, and she gisted her on how her madam complained about her food. She lamented that the rich would always discriminate against the poor, no matter how kind they pretend to be. Her friend interrupted her that her boss was right. Remember, I used to complain about your food then. Why do you cook like that? Does that odor not affect you? She asked. Adaeze stared at her, thinking of what to say. My food isn't delicious to you mere mortals because I cook for spirits, she said absent-mindedly. You cook for what? Lizzie queried with a curious look. That came out wrong. Never mind. When did this man get here? Why is he staring at you? Asked Lizzie. The native doctor that just moved into one of the flats in the compound stood outside Lizzie's flat from a distance and was staring strangely at them. Lizzie had hated the idea of a native doctor moving into the compound and had made up her mind to leave the compound after the expiration of her rent. Seeing the man staring at them added to her irritation. Lizzie and Adaeze were sitting outside the compound when it happened. Lizzie pulled her friend into the house. Why are you afraid of him? Asked Adaeze playfully. Who wouldn't be afraid of a native doctor? Avoid him all through your stay here and don't interact with their fetishism. They do a lot of pounding and singing and it gets so irritating. Just stay inside when it happens, she said, and went to work afterwards. Adaeze thought of all she said, smiling. She went out to peep at the man's flat and found out an elderly woman in white attire was cooking in a large calabash outside. She always cooked in a calabash too, so it attracted her and she went to the woman. Oh, you cook with a calabash too? I love it, but I don't know why people see it as fetish, she said passionately. Before the woman could respond, the native doctor came outside. He is a man in his 50s. How are you, my wife? He said. Adaeze smiled and went inside her friend's room. Started cooking, and as usual, the odor from her food filled up the air. She sat close to the cooking space and smiled at the smell of her food. She had a knock on her door and she went to open it. It was the native doctor. "I love the aroma of your food," he said with bulging eyes. "You love my food? Please come in. Let me share some with you," said Daisy, who allowed the man in, and she quickly went in to serve him from her pot of horrible cooking. She was glad that, for the first time, someone liked her aroma. "I hope he likes the food," she murmured as she served him. 20 minutes later, both of them were gisting happily. The native doctor had eaten the food with relish while Daisy watched him. She loved the joy on his face while he ate the food. Some months later, Lizzie was running out of her former compound after she went to confront the native doctor for hypnotizing Daisy into marriage. Daisy had suddenly started living with the native doctor when she got home one day. She thought it wasn't anything serious, even though she wondered why her friend would be in his flat. She didn't come in to sleep. She went to the man's flat, but she wasn't allowed to see her. Daisy responded to her from the window, telling her she was fine. After repeated attempts to get her friend out of the man's house, the native doctor had hypnotized her too. She suddenly woke up one day, packed her bags, and left the compound. The scale fell off her eyes some months later, and she had gone to her former house to look for her friend. The native doctor's students chased her out with charms. Lizzie's heart was in turmoil. She felt responsible for it because it happened when Daisy visited her. Daisy had become pregnant for the man. She has felt a deep and unexplainable connection with the man after he ate her food that day. The man had told her he wanted to eat more of her unique meals. She packed her bag that minute and went to his flat with him. Since then, she has assisted in cooking many of the concoctions the man needed for his craft. However, she noticed she was losing pregnancies. She has lost about 2 in the past 3 months. She has been having nightmares since she started living with him. She would see her friend from the village, Ngozi, smiling in the dream, joining her together with the native doctor in a marital union. Sometimes her real self gets the hold of her and she cries. She never planned to be a native doctor's wife. Sometimes when the spell gets active again, he goes to the native doctor and starts hugging him. Lizzie had gone to Daisy's mother in the village to report the situation. Daisy's mother shouted in a display of maternal sadness. People came around and advised her on what to do. She called her pastor and took him along to the city. They went to the police station and also got 2 policemen to go with them. While on the road, Lizzie suddenly forgot the address of the house. Daisy's mother started crying after many attempts to help her recollect by asking her questions. The police were getting impatient. Suddenly, the pastor looked at her and commanded the foul spirit of forgetfulness to get out of her. They got to the house, and after an intense spiritual battle between light and darkness, Daisy was rescued out of the house and the native doctor was arrested by the police.